Thank you for being here. My name is Anne-marie Peterson. I'm a member of the Singleton Jury Prize, and I'm also a Capital Group investor. I've been there for 20 years, and I'm a portfolio manager. But once upon a time, I was a retail analyst at Capital, hence meeting Ken. So Ken, dear friend, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Well, we are honored to have you. And you recently celebrated an important milestone on September 16th. You were surprised by a few friends, including Frank Blake. Ken turned 90, yet he is as handsome, sharp,
Pretty
youthful,
it's pretty good so far.
vigorous as ever. So you would never know. Nothing's changed in the 20 years since I've known you.
Is that Tom Taylor back there?
Yeah, Tom Taylor's here. You're another Home Depot success story.
Great. Oh, yeah. Big time.
Yep, to see you.
Good.
All right. We all are. So your life, the theme here is excellence in capital allocation, and you're being honored tonight for that. And the approach, like I thought, though, as I was reflecting on this, you, Frank, and others, is, of course, the excellence you're being honored for is wealth creation through the founding of companies and investing. But what really makes you special is how you go about doing it. It's one, building relationships, and it's two, your passion for creating opportunity for others. So that is what has the meaningful and enduring impact beyond the wealth you've created, and we're very grateful for that. And so before we dive into questions, I want to share the personal story to bring this to life of how you've done this for both Capital Group shareholders or American Fund shareholders and for me. 17 years ago, I was assigned retail coverage, and I had to take a look at Home Depot, and it was a bit ugly situation at the time, as you recall. Nardelli, we were kicking him out. Housing crisis, not fun. And you had a new CEO who knew nothing about retail and was hired by his predecessor. He was a lawyer named Frank Blake. A friend had introduced us, and I thought we'd talk on the phone, but instead you insisted I hop on a plane the next day and come to New York City, and we would spend the day in the car touring stores on Long Island, and you were going to tell me everything about Home Depot. And as an aside, I was 8 months pregnant at that time, but I came anyway. So Kim, you were a little surprised to see that. But I got to know you and the guts of the business and the stores. And in the car, you shared the history about the company, which really outline, God, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity here. There are great bones, it's great culture, and a ton of opportunity. I would not have invested in the company had you not spent that time with me, as I was reflecting. Fast forward, we bought 12% of the company in 2010. The stock went from 12 to 400. So over a decade, it was up 14x.
So you should ride in the car with me again.
I know. Can we go after this? And up with the S&P. But more importantly, I became friends with you and Frank Blake and Bonnie Hill. I learned the importance of leadership, culture, and that in how to invest, and that's core to my approach today. So I'm very thankful for you. So let's dive in. Why don't you, can you talk about your childhood and your growing up, how it shaped you and your philosophy about life and your approach?
I was born into a family of modest means. I didn't know it. The house was always warm in the wintertime. There was always plenty of food on the table, and things were reasonably stable. I found out later on that Mom worked in the school cafeteria to make ends meet to help Dad, and my dad was a union plumber, and I never heard them complain about their lot. I never heard them why me or anything. My father had the additional challenge of being manic depressive. He was bipolar, when they didn't know much about that. And I admire him. I look back even more so now. No matter what, he made sure he went to work because he had a family to feed. And as I said, the only thing that was lacking in my life at that time, as far as I knew, it was air conditioning. I mean, so it was hot in the summertime, and I'd have a pair of skivvies on and sleep on top of the bed, and it wasn't so bad. But I had a wonderful childhood. I had a mother and father that gave my brother and me the one thing a kid should have: unconditional love. And I'll tell you, I was a mischievous kid. And if my father said once to me, he said 1,000 times to me, quote, "If I never see you again, it'll be too soon." And 5 minutes later, he's hugging me and kissing me. We were a very Italian family, physical. We hugged, we kissed. And it was a wonderful way to develop some self-confidence. And I always think about these two wonderful people. I never heard them complain. I knew that when Dad was going through a bad period, he'd come home and go into the bedroom and with the shades down. And we kept going. And thank God he lived to be 85 years old. He saw, thank God, most of what I got involved with happen. And I'll only tell you one story about how he took the air out of my balloon. I had just gotten my first plane. It was a little Lear 35. And I am partners in a truck leasing business in North Carolina. And my parents loved my partner, Tom Teague. So I called Mom in the afternoon about 3 o'clock. I said, "Mother, do me a favor. Please feed Dad early and pack his underwear and pack some shaving stuff and a pair of pajamas. I'm taking him with me tonight to North Carolina." It's okay. So I go by and pick him up, and we're driving. Instead of, when you come out their street they live on, you make a right to go to LaGuardia, and you make a left to go where I was going, which was Republic Aviation, Farmingdale. And I make the turn left, and Dad says to me, "You're going in the wrong direction." And I said, No, please. Now, if you haven't flown in a Lear 35, understand one thing. You never stand up, because there's no room to stand up. You crawl in and you crawl out. So we get to the airport, and now this is my big day. I'm going to show my dad this thing that's mine, and, you know. And so we take off, and we land in Winston-Salem, and I get out of the plane first to help him to get out. And I said, "What'd you think?" He said, "Oh, I like the big planes better."
All right.
Boom, that balloon went just like that, okay?
Kept you in your place.
But that's the childhood I had, and it was an idyllic childhood. It was really a wonderful childhood. Mom had all of her friends, and they had different gatherings and places, and whenever they had a gathering away from our home, Dad, my brother, and I would go around the yard and do some yard work. And he always, I'll never forget it, there was Breyer's ice cream. They came in cubes, chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. And he'd send my brother and me down to the local drugstore who sold Breyer's, these things, and a bottle of Hoffman cream soda. And we'd come back, and we'd come in from outside, and we'd make ice cream sodas with Hoffman cream soda. And these are the things I remember. And I think I was blessed because of that, because I think I developed a sensitivity for people like my mom and dad. I should have. I hope I did. And I think it impacted my life for the good.
Thanks for that. Can you talk about your first big break and how that in the business world? You went to Bucknell. You were not particularly connected. The way you describe it is you were maybe not always the best student. But you...
My first big business break?
Yep, business break.
The Louisiana delegation to Congress, every year, the Saturday night before Lent starts, has in Washington something called a Mardi Gras Ball. And the fellow that was working with me at R.W. Pressbridge, the investment banking firm, where I was a partner and I was a salesman, got me an invitation, Elaine and I, an invitation with he and his wife. And that night we were sitting with a gentleman, elegant gentleman, real gentleman, and we got to know each other, and we had a few more drinks than maybe we should have, and we used a few bad words maybe we shouldn't have, but we had a great time. And he mentioned to me casually that he's with a company that's getting ready to go public, and everybody in Wall Street wants the deal. And I figured, why not? So I said to him, is there any chance that I can get an appointment to pitch this man who runs this company? He said, yeah, he call me on Monday, I'll see what I can do. So Monday morning I called him and he said, you got an appointment at 11:30, you have 30 minutes, you get to be there promptly at 11:30 and leave exactly at 12. Got my marching orders. The tragic part of this story is the two kids I brought with me were killed in that Hilton Inn fire up in Westchester County in 1980. They were wonderful young men, Duke Glenn and Roger Green. Anyway, so I get in, and we got in on the door to his office is on an angle, and you walk in and you see this desk, and all I could see was these two jug ears and a pair of eyes. And the fella gets up, hi there, Ross Perot, nice to meet you, what can I do for you? I said, well, nice to meet you. Come on over here, let's sit over here, get to know each other a little better. So we sit down, and he starts telling me what Goldman Sachs said, what Merrill, everybody wanted the deal. Morgan Stanley, all the pitches they got. And next thing I know, it's 29 and a half minutes, and I got to be out of there in 30 seconds. So he says to me, well, what do you think what I said? I said, Ross, I said, I'd like to see you again, and I can elaborate. No, tell me right now. Oh, I said, I had 30 minutes. I know you're a busy guy, and I was told I had to be out of here. No, forget that. Tell me what you think. I said, well, I'm going to blow the time rule, right? So Jack Haidt also told me, make sure you don't swear. I'm going to blow the time rule. So what the hell, I might as well go for broke. And I said, pardon me, I said, Mr. Perot, that's the biggest pile of horse shit I've ever heard in my life. And he went back like that. And we talked for 13 and a half hours. We talked until 1:30 the next morning. And he was driving me around Dallas looking for a drugstore because we were going back at 3 o'clock in the afternoon for a drugstore for shaving gear and toothbrush and whatever. And when I got back to New York the next afternoon, he said, well, I was going to make my decision by tomorrow, Friday, but he says, I think I'll wait. I want to get to know you a little better. I said, okay. So I go down the following week, and I explained to him my understanding of what an IPO is and how it works. Not the mechanics, not the magic, but getting the orders, you know. The bottom line on an IPO is if you can't sell it, you can't buy it. So the key is to get the deal done. So I go down, and the second meeting, he says to me, would you do me a favor, please? I said, sure. Would you bring back, next time you come down, some of those prospecti? And I'm thinking, oh, my God, I haven't got one. I never did one before. So I said, sure. So I'm going to wing it. So I go down a third time, and by the way, Ross always picked me up at the airport himself and dropped me off at the airport himself. We ended up having a wonderful, wonderful friendship. And so we go down, and we have the meeting. The prospecti never come up. I'm thinking, I'm going to be safe. He drives me to the airport. He said, oh, by the way, Ken, you got those prospecti? I said, no. Did you forget them? I said, no, I didn't forget them. There are none. He said, what do you mean? I said, you'll be the first. But I said, Ross, nobody can screw your deal up. You got a great company, and it's very unusual, and it does great things. I got one shot. It's in my interest to make sure this thing's a home run. And the rest is history, and we stayed the best of friends. We found out we were married the same hour, the same day, the same year. Didn't know each other. We celebrated our anniversaries together. One of the things that I'm glad happened, because I wouldn't have had as much as I ended up having, when Bernie and Arthur got fired, I was going to take him down to see Ross because they wanted to raise $2 million. And I went down to see Ross, and bottom line is, it didn't work out. He was going to get 70% of the company, and Bernie and Arthur and people that came after them were going to have 25, and I was going to have 5. Ross had a financial advisor, investment advisor, who didn't like the deal. And Ross said to me, well, what do you want to do? I said, Ross, look, Brian Smith, his name was, he was previously the CFO of Texas Instruments. I said, Brian didn't like the deal, Ross, and he's your advisor. And this is a startup. We haven't even thought of where we're going to go. We're going to pick someplace in America to get started. And he said to me, well, all right. He says, you want to come back? I said, well, Ross, I know. He wanted to know what the deal was. I said, well, Bernie and Arthur have kids, and they're going to take their salaries, and they're going to get their health insurance. They need health insurance. And I said, they're going to study America, and they're going to decide where they want to go and how they want to do it. And he said, what happens if they don't come up with anything? I said, well, what's left? You get the money back, and they go out and get a job, and I go out and look for another deal. And so we're in the meeting, and Ross says, tell me about the fringe benefits. And so I said, well, they're going to have health insurance. And I said, they're not going to have any vacation because they're going to be doing all this work studying America. And I said, to save money, they've got 2 old cars they were leasing. They're going to buy them from the leasing company. Arthur, what kind of car you drive? And Arthur said, I drive this is 1978. I drive a 1971 Pontiac. Bernie, how about you? And Bernie says, I drive a 1969 Cadillac, thereabouts. Cadillac? My guys drive Chevrolets, they don't drive Cadillacs. So I could see things weren't going as well as, so Bernie says to me, can I talk to you for a minute? I said, Ross, can we use your conference room? So we go into the conference room in the back of Ross's desk. And Ross, Bernie says, get me the hell out of here. He says, if this guy's going to break my chops about a car that hasn't got scrap value, what's going to happen if we get, I said, Bernie, look, he's my friend and he's a very important business relationship with me. Let me handle it. So I go back in the room and I said, Ross, look, Brian doesn't like this deal. I think we ought to cool it for a couple of weeks and see where we are then. He's okay. So we leave and we're waiting for the elevator to go down to the street. And Arthur says, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I said, Arthur, we're going to raise $2 million for 50%. I'm going to get my 5, and the investors are going to have 45. He said, wait a minute. That's a better deal than we were getting from him. I said, yeah. I said, Arthur, in my business, when you can't sell something, you mark it up. In your business, when you can't sell something, you mark it down. And that's what we did. And if I told you the multiple of value, it's staggering. All I'll tell you is, and I'm really proud of this because it's a reflection of these kids in the stores and what they do every day. We went public in September of 1981. Apple went public in December of 80. Apple stock has compounded at 17+% from then until now. Ready? Home Depot stock has compounded at 28.5% from then until now. We started with a capitalization of $50 million, and we have a 400 billion plus, do the math. But we're the #1 performing stock in the S&P, and I'm proud of that. And as I said, it's a reflection of what these kids, this company's all about those kids. The vendors will sell you anything they make whenever you want it. The magic juice in Home Depot are the kids. And the people like Tom Taylor, by the way, who started 17 years old, as I remember, stacking lumber. And my only annoyance with him is he's still not with us. But
It's the
he's-
CEO of Floor and
he's
Decor.
an
He
example
defected.
of what we did, and the key was the people. It always was.
Maybe, I mean, on that note, can you just share a little bit more about the founding of Home Depot, how you met Arthur and Bernie, why you decided to back them? And I mean, you touched on it, but maybe say more about the store culture. Because at the time, I mean, there were tons of little home improvement operators, right? And you
Well,
guys,
it was fragmented. The industry
Right.
was a bunch of fiefdoms, and they had geography. It was almost like a franchise. And I had a client in Philadelphia, a company called Panorama, and he was struggling. He had 36. His stores were an average of 4,000 feet each. No way they could make it. And back up there, you had Heckinger's, you had Pergament, you had Rickle, and those are in the Northeast. And then you had Scotty's in Florida, and you had Handy Andy, and then you had Handy Dan on the West. Well, anyway, so I'm talking with Gary, trying to help figure out what do we do with this mess. I said, Gary, who in your mind, because what they did, they had the hardware show in Chicago every year, and all of the retailers would show up, and the vendors would display their new stuff, and they still do it, I think, but they do it out here now, I think, don't they? Or Las Vegas, I think they do it in. And so he said to me, there's a guy in LA that's the best in the business. I said, what's his name? He said, Bernie Marcus. He says, there's nobody like him. I said, how well do you know him? He said, I know him very well. I said, well, do me. It was about 3:30 in Philadelphia. I was taking the train back. And I said, do me a favor. Can you call him up and ask him to take my call? I get to instead of going home, I go to my office, about 6:30, 7 o'clock, and I get the old Moody's manuals. Remember the big, thick Moody's manuals? And I'm looking at these numbers, I'm saying, something's wrong. This company's earning $1.50 a share after taxes, and it's selling for $3. So I called Gary. I said, Gary, please do me a favor. Please call him right now. Tell him I want to talk to him. So he calls him up, and he calls me back. He's waiting for your call. It was 4:15, 4:30 in L.A. City of Commerce, the City of Industry. I get him confused. He was in one of those two places. And I get him on the phone, and I start grilling him about the numbers. And I said, do you have no recurring gain? Did you sell some real estate? He said, no. He said, we just have these stores, and we have a pretty good business, and we're expanding. We're going into Denver. We're going into Houston. And I said, I'd like to come out and see you. He said, when? I said, tomorrow. He said, I'm a little bit impulsive, by the way, if you don't know. So he says to me, okay. I said, well, tell me where we meet. Because what I did is I took the 7:30 flight out of JFK, nonstop to LA, and I'm going to meet him in a diner, a Greasy Spoon, and he tells me where it is, and I get there. I got there about 11 o'clock, so I'm waiting. There's a booth, and I'm sitting there with a plastic, the shiny plastic imitation, whatever it is, on the seats, and chrome all over. And I see him coming in, see these two guys dressed in business suits come in. And that's him. I go to get up, and something's holding me. There's a wad of bubble gum on my butt. And my first thought was, good luck. This is good luck. And we sat. He brought a fellow with him who I got a letter from this man last year when my book, 2 years ago, my book had come out, and I mentioned Irwin Diller. He brought this fella who was his personal lawyer because he was having stress with a fellow by the name of Sandy Sigaloff. And he wanted to make sure he didn't do anything that was illegal by talking to me. And we talked, and we got to know each other. And I'll only tell you this. Bernie rarely wrote me. He wrote me a letter. I think, Frank, I had you read it. Have you read it? He wrote me a letter that if that was the only possession in my life I had, I'd be the wealthiest man in the world. And what he and I had going as friends was something that can never be replaced. We had this complete confidence and faith and trust in each other, right to the end. And let me tell you about Bernie Marcus. He was a champ. Bernie was a champ in every respect. And if you look, I'm honored that I'm on the board of his foundation. Frank Blake is the chairman. But Bernie is going to make sure that all of the wealth, don't forget he was 49 years old when he got fired. And I'll tell you how that happened. He and I were walking a brand new store in Houston. Now, if I'm anything, I'm enthusiastic. And I show my emotions. I'm Italian, okay? This is how we are. And I couldn't believe the store. It was a handy dance store. It was fabulous. And I'm showing, oh my God. He says, relax, relax. I said, what do you mean relax? Look at what you got here. He says, if somebody does something that I know could happen, this industry is going to be wiped out as it is. What is it? So powerful, I can't tell you. Fast forward now, Bernie gets fired for nothing. He got fired because, frankly, I hope no relative is sick of office here, because Sandy didn't like me and I didn't like him, and it was a mutual dislike society. So Bernie gets fired. And by the way, I didn't want to sell my stock back to Sigelov. We had about 19% of the company, myself and some investors. And Bernie pleaded with me, please sell him your stock. It's ironic, it was November 30th, 1977. That very day, I flew out to San Diego with my wife because I sold a medical device company I controlled by the name of Vivac to Eli Lilly. By the way, Lilly was up 30.
And you still hold the stock. It was at $2.95, and it's $800 now.
Lilly's was up $36 today.
But who's counting?
I count every day. So anyway.
Me now.
So after that, Bernie knew I was going to be out. He invited me, why don't you and your wife come up and have dinner? So Elaine and I drove up to L.A., and we stayed at the Century Plaza Hotel on Avenue of the Stars, and we drove out to Encino, where Bernie lived, and Billy and Bernie and Billy's son by an earlier marriage, Michael, she made a nice Chinese dinner for us. I can tell you right now. After dinner, Bernie takes me out in the living room, and Billy and Elaine are cleaning up the kitchen. I promise you, they don't cook anymore, and they don't clean up the dishes anymore. Okay, I tease them all the time about that. And so he says, do me a favor, please. He said, sell him your stock. He wants to take it private. He needs me. I said, Bernie, you don't get it. This guy needs nobody. He had on his door, some of you people that read comic books will remember, he had on his door to his office, Ming the Merciless. That's what he was tough. So I said, Bernie, if I sell my stock, I'm signing you a death warrant. He said, no, he doesn't know the business. He's a nuclear engineer. He doesn't know what he's doing. He needs me, okay. I said, okay. So the next morning, he gets back on the phone with Ed Kaufman of Irela Manila, who was down the street on the other side of Avenue of the Stars. Then, I don't know where they are now. And here's the conversation. I got Ken at my house right now, and he's willing to sell the stock. Now, by the way, they tried to buy it from me at $8 a share. I offered it at 10. They said no. They came back at 10. I said 12. I said no. Now it's $19 to $20 a share. So I said, Bernie says to me, they want to know how much you want. I said, $25.50 a share. I said, and I get a $150,000 fee for negotiating the deal. And a full-page ad in the Wall Street, one of the tombstones. I mean, here's this little teeny-weeny little firm, Invemed Securities, with a full-page ad announcing a tender offer to buy in these shares, which was only probably $30 million worth, something like that. So anyway, He said, I'll pick you up tomorrow morning. I go back, and we're going to go down to our L and sign all the papers. I said, okay. So we go down, and we get out of the car. His old Cadillac. Don't forget that, his old Cadillac. I look across the roof. I'm on the path. I said, Bernie, I'm going upstairs, and I'm signing your death warrant. He said, what do you mean? I said, you're a marked man. You're finished. I'm telling you, Bernie, right now, I have no trouble saying I changed my mind. But I want to warn you, if I do this, you're dead. No, he doesn't know it. Okay. Fast forward 3 months. He calls my house. I was traveling. I got home late Saturday afternoon. He calls my house 4 or 5 times. I call him back. I said, you got fired. How'd you know? How'd you know? I said, you've been calling here all day. He said, yeah. He said, he fired me. He fired Arthur. He fired Ron Brill. He really cleaned the place out. So I said, when can you get to New York? He said, why? I said, I want to talk to you. So he said to me, I can get there tonight. I said, fine, I'll meet you tomorrow morning after I go to Mass. That, by the way, that's the other thing. My faith, like those kids in the Home Depot store, are a very important part of my life. I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable, but my faith has seen me through some pretty tough spots. So he says to me, so I get there at 9:30, Peacock Alley, and he's got this. I asked him to bring a guy with him who could tell me what he did. Well, what they did was they stacked the deck in San Jose. There was going to be a union election, and they moved people in from other stores that they knew would be opposed to it. And of course, that's a no-no, and it's a garden variety violation. The union wins the election automatically. So he said, yeah, he fired Ron, he fired Arthur, he fired me. And I said, well, Bernie, let me tell you what. You just got hit with a golden horseshoe and you don't know it. He said, what are you talking about? I'm out of work. I got 3 kids. I have a mortgage. I have no stock. I said, Bernie, when we were in Houston, you told me there was something out there that could happen. And if it happened, it would dramatically change the industry. I said, we're going to do it. And that's the rest is history. I go back to Bernie Marcus. I want to tell you, the world would be perfect if every person on earth was a Bernie Marcus. His affection and his regard for people like Tom Taylor and his time he spent developing these hardworking kids that just wanted a break was emblematic. I can go on forever. All I'll tell you is, if he was a Catholic, he'd be saint. He'd be canonized. Okay. I told him. I said, if I get up there and I have some sway, I'll see if I can get you in.
Well, shortly after our store visit, I brought a portfolio manager named Brady Enright into Capitol to Ken's office, and I was like, I think there's something here. I want this guy to check it out. So Ken, of course, gets Frank on the phone, but also your main problem with Nardelli at the time. You actually started crying and pounding the table, and you said, he is abusing my 300,000 associates in the stores. This will not stand. It wasn't about the stock price. It was about the store culture, which is...
Well, I would go to the stores. I love to walk the stores and talk to the kids. It was, it was heaven. I still do. They don't walk with me. What I do now is I invite 25 store managers to lunch in June on the Long Island stores, and I invite 25 store managers from the Manhattan, the metropolitan area, to a lunch. And we go to a great restaurant, and they order off the menu whatever they can't drink, because there's no drinking policy in the company. And I just listen to the stories of these kids' lives. Mm-hmm. And if that doesn't make you feel good about this great country and this company, nothing will. I mean, these are kids... Tom, what did we pay you an hour when we started? $4, $6, $7, $8? Huh? $4 an hour. And now he runs floor and wall decor, you bum. Don't you sell anything?
Stock's been pretty good.
That's the magic of this company, of these kids. And they just want a shot. They want a shot at the American dream. And that's our responsibility, to make sure they get that shot. They aren't all going to win, but damn it, they ought to have a chance to see whether they got it or not.
All right, I mean, that's the point. It's like opportunity for others that you've been so emphasized.
I did okay myself, so I got.
I
got
mean,
no
you've done
complaints.
just fine, yes.
I don't fly in a Lear 35 anymore.
Right. It might be a G7. Okay. Talk about NYU. I think that's a really interesting example, like it's an incredible example of you're a capital allocator as a philanthropist. And I'd asked you the other day when we had lunch how you got involved at NYU and how you decided to make a substantial investment there, including free tuition for life for medical students. So talk more about
Every
that
time I
experience.
get myself in a tight spot, give me Marty Lipton on the phone. So Marty Lipton would always one of the greatest lawyers in existence and a fine gentleman. And one day Marty calls me in 1999 and says, Ken, J.O. Levy, who was the president, and I would like to come see you. We need to talk to you. We got a problem. We think you can help. I said, sure. So they come to my office, and he proceeds to tell me about this nightmare of a merger between NYU and Mount Sinai Hospital. My first thought was, oh, do we have a medical school? I didn't even know they had a medical school. I went to the Stern School at night, and I'm grateful. Did a lot for that program, did a lot for me. I said, Marty, what are you talking about? Well, he said, we merged our hospital with Mount Sinai. They hate us, we hate them. It's a merger from hell. And we don't know what to do. And I said, well, Marty, I was 65. I'm going to be 65. I said, Marty, I can't say no to you, but I'm not going to say yes. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to spend some time talking to people and seeing if I think I can help. I don't want to take something on. And by the way, the place was a shambles. I'm telling you, every place you look, something needed to be fixed. It was a neglected. In fact, the merger was effectively a shotgun merger. The university was worried that the medical center was going to pull it down financially, and they decided the only hope they had was to merge it. And Mount Sinai thought they were getting rid of a lemon. So they both had lemons, and they thought they'd make one big lemon out of two small lemons. I said, Marty, I had a friend of mine on Long Island who was a surgeon, like a second father to me, named John Mountain. I said, I want to come see you. And he and I used to have breakfast on Saturday mornings at the cafeteria at the original North Shore Hospital. And I told him, I said, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I said, but Marty Lipton seems to think I can help. And he said to me, well, let me tell you something. He said, there's a guy there by the name of Frank Spencer. Now, I'd spent a lot of time. Every place I looked, I said, don't do this. Don't. This is a bad deal. Get the hell out of here. You know? So he said, I want you to meet Frank Spencer. Frank Spencer, and I'll stand on this. Frank Spencer was a true pioneer of open heart surgery, not DeBakey and not Barnard, and it was Frank Spencer. Remember the television show MASH? Frank Spencer was a surgeon in the Navy, and he was assigned to a MASH hospital in Korea. And one day, the Surgeon General of the Army issued an order, direct order to all people. If kids are brought in off the battlefield with badly wounded limbs, don't bother trying to save them, amputate them. One day they wheeled this kid into Frank's tent. And Frank's looking at the wounds, and he says to himself, I can fix these legs. I'm not going to take those legs off. Sure enough, Frank does the operation, the kid's legs are saved. But the word gets back to the Surgeon General, and you know, a direct order in the military is a no-no. That's treason almost. And the word gets back, and they're going to court-martial Frank for violating a direct order, disobeying a direct order, whatever it was. And he's now being deposed in connection with discovery, and the lawyer, adjutant general lawyer for the Army, Are you aware you had a direct order not to do that? Yes, I was. And you did it anyway? Yes, I did. And I do it again. And the guy looked, he says, what do you mean? He said, well, I figured I might get court-martialed, but I thought to myself that if I got court-martialed and I got sent to the stockade for whatever period of time, every day I spent in the stockade, because I saved that kid's legs, would be a very precious day to me because that kid's walking around on his own legs in his hometown. They wanted to get away. They dropped the charges, and they gave Frank a medal. And so I went to see Dr. Spencer. He was a wonderful, elegant gentleman from Kentucky. I said, I got one shot left. I'm going to be 65, and this is a big task. And he said to me, Ken, I'll only tell you one thing. We have the worst conditions here. We're terribly neglected by everybody, but I promise you we're practicing the finest medicine you can get any place in the world. He said, we have doctors here that you can't believe. And so I went home and I said to Elaine, Elaine, we did pretty good. So I said, I want to take this job, but I want to put my money where my mouth is. They never asked me. I said, I want you and me to give them $100 million as a gift toward getting the place going again. And she said to me, do we have that kind of money? I said, yeah, I think we can afford it, okay? And one of the, next to Home Depot would be one of the best things I've ever done in my life. And I'll let you in on a secret. The nurses, the doctors, the guards, the cafeteria workers, they are treated the same way we treat an associate at the Home Depot. We respect them, and I'm proud to tell you, for 4 years in a row now, this is the fourth year, we're the #1 hospital in the United States of America. We have the lowest mortality rate. You have a better chance of going home alive if you come to NYU. And when I gave them the $100 million, they wanted to do something, and they said, would you like the name? I said, no, I don't want my name on anything. I said, I know who I am, and I like who I am, and that's good enough. For 8 years, it was NYU, that's what it was. We brought a new dean in who, by the way, made this all happen, Bob Grossman. Spectacular. The Bernie Marcus of medicine, okay? I mean, the same, and he when he took the job, I went to Elaine. I said, Elaine, we got to double down. Bob Grossman called me and said, please, if you let us put your name on this building, on this facility, the whole place, it'll have babies. I said, I'm not comfortable. I said, I know how well I did, and I'm thrilled with how well I did, and Elaine feels the same way. He says, please. Since then, we've raised $5.5 billion in philanthropy. And if you look at our numbers, mortality rate, infection rate, it's unbelievable what we have. And of course, then the next thing was, the day that Bob was installed as dean, I said, we walked into his office, I got my arm around him, and I said, what's on your sheet? And Bob was a poor kid from the Bronx, who slept in a bed with his uncle, not the same room, in a bed, the same bed. Bob said, one day I would love it if we could be tuition free. And I said, Bob, I don't know if we'll be able to do it, but let's try. Let's start now. We can't do it now. He said, okay. Well, it took us not 10 years. And in 2019, we became tuition free. And I got to share this story with you. The day that we announced, it's called White Coat Day. This is when the kids enter medical school, get their white candy store coat. You know, remember the candy store guys? And they come up and they get their coats. A doctor puts them on for them, and they go sit down. And Elaine and I go to the podium, and Elaine gets up and she says, Ken and I have something we'd like to share with you. Honest to God, this is true. And so I said, as of right now, every student at NYU Langone Medical Center is tuition free. It was scary what happened, just as silence as it is in here right now. There was this period of silence, and then this massive eruption, like Vesuvius. I was screaming and crying, and parents yelling, "I tell you, you came to the right place." And
the G7 didn't do that for you.
That was the first time I really felt rich. And I got to tell you, the letters I get from these kids now, you can't buy them. It's unbelievable what these kids. And now, by the way, we're having babies. 2 years ago, I get a call from one of my trustees, Trudy Gottesman. Her father-in-law was one of Warren Buffett's original investors, Sandy Gottesman. And he passed away, and his wife wanted to come see me. She came in about 2 years ago, and she said to me, "Could I ask you a question?" She says, "How do you feel about what you did?" And I said, her name is Ruth. I said, "Ruth, I can't think of a better thing in my life that I've done with what we've accomplished than to see these kids and to see what they're doing." She says, "Well, I'm going to do the same thing at Albert Einstein." She gave $1 billion worth of Berkshire Hathaway stock to fund free tuition. And then Mike Bloomberg, a wonderful philanthropist, last summer I was out at the Allen Conference with him, and he said to me, he was doing it at Hopkins. Now, by the way, our program is no means test. If you get accepted, you get it. And my belief was simple. These kids are going to be making the sacrifices to become doctors, and it's not an easy job. I want them to get recognition, not what their old man did by saying, "You get your money." By the way, I'm not shy about calling the fathers up if they got some shekels to say, "Hey, you want to help out? We'll take the money," okay? But I want the kid to know he earned it. That was our whole notion. And so the next 4 months later, Albert Einstein, and then Mike says to me he was doing it at Johns Hopkins, except he was only going to do it for needs-based. And I said, "Mike, the reason I went the other way was I wanted these kids to know that they're making the sacrifice. It's a tough, tough job." And anyway.
On that note, I mean, hard to top that. I want to open it to questions, particularly from the students. And thank you, Ken, for sharing your incredible story.
By the way, this lady is more thorough. When she and I went on this tour of the stores, I got a lot of energy. I want to tell you, I slept like a baby that night. There wasn't a question she didn't ask me, and but she's the best. And
You're the best.
I have great respect for her.
Mutual
Husband,
admiration.
it didn't hurt her husband went to Bucknell.
Helps. All right, questions. And maybe Molly, or the mic.
Microphone.
Blue.
Hi, and thank you for your time. It seemed like a common thread through your stories was uplifting others, and I was curious how you always focused on not only success in business, but making sure the people you worked with and the people who worked for you were also successful in their careers.
My wife says I'm a people junkie, and I plead guilty. I look at the world today, and it breaks my heart. There's a song, "Let there be peace and let it begin with me." And I think that somebody like me that's done so enormously well by the system has a responsibility to make sure that the kid that's where I was 85 years ago, 80 years ago, has the same shot that I did. And I didn't plan on using this, but I will tell you this. This blue square, this is hate. There's too much hate in the world today. And it doesn't do anybody any good. Nobody. And I think that people like me who've been blessed in more ways than they can count, have a very strong moral obligation. Moral obligation. And because of my faith, I would consider it a sin that if I didn't take my talent and do what I could do to make the world a better place for everybody. And I think we owe that to each other. You know, it breaks my heart, the level of discourse, or lack of discourse, among our political leaders and our government officials in this country. Breaks my heart. It stinks. It's terrible. We're better than that. As creatures, we're better than that. So I think you want to reach back and give that kid a break. And I'll tell you one story. I love this story. I got these kids, I get a restaurant that sets up a table for me in a big square, so I go all around. I say, okay, tell me when you started with us. Tell me what you did when you started with us. Tell us a little bit about your life. The last store manager on my right, teeny-weeny lady, tells the following story. She was 16 years old and she got pregnant. And the boy wouldn't marry her, so she had the baby, because they were devout Catholics, no abortion. And 2 years later, she honored the guy by letting him do it again. She goes back to her family and says, I'm going on welfare. And the father said, no, you're not. You're going out and get a job, and we're going to help you raise your children. Fast forward. She's now a store manager, makes very good money, got some nice stock positions. She tells me the following story. The guy finally decided he wanted to marry her, and she told him to drop dead. Her two kids have both gone through college. One's a school teacher, one works for a bank. It's truly the American success story. And I will tell you right now, those kinds of stories are the things that turn people like Frank and Tom and me on. In their own way, they mean more to me than what it did for me. Because I don't know if it's talent or whatever, but I had something that I was going to make sure. But there's a lot of kids out there that just need a shot. And if people like me don't make sure that shot's available, shame on us.
Exactly. Any other? We have time for one more question, and it can be, if it's not a student, anyone.
It fell in front of you.
Thank you, and thank you for taking the time. My question was more on leadership, and given the time you've spent going up the corporate ladder and also co-founding Home Depot, I was just curious if you can tell us what's the most important thing you learned about leadership?
About what's the most important thing about leadership?
That you've learned over the time, yeah.
Is that you can't do it alone. The guy that thinks he's a one-man band needs a psychiatrist. You can't do it alone. All of our success at Home Depot, and I love these stories. I have letters, and by the way, I answer every letter I get in my own handwriting. Every one. The person that's taken the time to write to me deserves to get a write back from me to them. And the stories I hear about what these kids do, just you say, yeah, we did okay financially and we built a hell of a company, but boy, have we got a culture? Have we got something that really sets us apart? That makes the difference, that hopefully makes the world a little bit better for somebody else. Not a whole lot, a little bit better. And to see these kids, something I'm very committed to is a friend of mine had a daughter who had Down syndrome, and she was graduating from high school and they had nothing to do with her. He said, do you got any ideas? And I called up the store manager, and they said, well, send her in. She couldn't do it. But the result of that thing was we started something. It was called Ken's Kids. Well, they're now grown up, so it's now called Ken's Crew, and I think we have 450 of them. They're fabulous. And boy, just think when they get that check, the pay, how they feel. There's a worth to them, and there's a creativity in them that you can't replace. And I got to tell you the truth, I feel good about it. Maybe I shouldn't, but I feel good about it. And why not? So, getting rich is one thing. I like that. I've been rich and I've been poor. Rich is better. Trust me, okay? But seeing the value of what you've had a part of, help somebody else, nothing better. And if you know you want to have a sense of worth about yourself, do something for somebody else. Whatever, I don't care what it is, do something. It doesn't, and if I sound like a preacher, at 90 years old, I'm getting close, and I'm saying, well, I better make damn certain I got the deck stacked right for me. But that's people like me that have succeeded beyond my wildest dreams from the capitalistic system. I think we have an obligation as strong as a sin if we don't do it, to reach back. And I have more feelings of accomplishment with Tom's success. Why? Because he was there at the beginning. He was 17, and he was working with a couple of crazies, Pat Farah and Terry Kinsky. I mean, they were whack jobs. But I think this is what's missing in business. There's got to be a moral side and a social obligation side to what we do.
So on that note, if you are wondering why the jury selected Ken, I think we've definitively answered that question. We're so grateful for you, Ken, and if everybody in this room, I'm inspired to go live like Ken. Do a little bit more of that, I think. Have her life.
I want to just say one thing. When I have my meetings with these managers, I tell them, in their store, there's a person that's going through living hell. Find them. Put your arm around them. You might get sued today, but that's okay. Put your arm around them and say, what can I do to help? But you got to find them. And that goes to all of us in whatever walk of life we're in. There's somebody out there that's really hurting. What have I done today to help alleviate that hurt? Thanks for having me.
All right, and thank you so much, Ken.